Okay, so the video is started. Let me maximize. Actually, the part I was going to do is actually start Postgres. I had a couple of issues when I was doing this. The book describes how to do this on Windows, and that works perfectly fine. I had to refigure out how to do it on Linux. So if you're on Windows, you actually have an advantage because it describes how to the way to do it. But I'll show you how to do it on Linux too. Okay. Boost. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do are just some what I would call system queries, and these are pretty easy. Like almost all relational databases, in fact, I think all of them have ways to query the meta information, the information about the structure of the table, not the context of it data-wise. You know, what are the objects in the database, all of that. So these are basically queries about the database itself as opposed to the content of the database. Now, you might notice there's a Postgres database, and there's also, so in Postgres, there are two schemas there. No, public, where is it? There are two catalogs? Yes. So there's an ANSI, this is Postgres, which is the system databases, right? And there's two of these in here. There's, oh, come on, I can get set up. There's an ANSI database and a Postgres SQL database. They do the same things, essentially. The ANSI one is named what it is because it meets the ANSI standard for how you're supposed to do system views. The Postgres SQL is actually a direct access to tables that store all of the meta information, which can be useful. You can get all the information out of Postgres. Actually, you can get most out of the ANSI, but not everything. But everything you can get out of Postgres. The dangerous thing about the Postgres SQL is it is the system database tables. If you go in there and you mess them up, your database doesn't work anymore. Right? Because you've screwed up the meta information. So this one is a little more dangerous than the ANSI one. The ANSI one is just views of the system information. So just to show an example, I'm just going to do select star from, and I'll do the information schema. Information schema dot, and I'm just going to do tables, right? And it will show me all of the tables in Community Assist. Now, it is actually showing me all of the tables, not only the ones that I made, but also the ones that are in the PG catalog, right, the Postgres one. So there's a lot of system tables that are associated with it that is also showing me. There's a way, I think, to limit that a little bit. So if I'm looking to, so we could say if we wanted to limit this a little bit more, we could say where table schema equals public. And then it would only show us our own tables. are the ones that we made. It's also, notice we're in Community Assist, so it's contextual. It knows that we're in Community Assist context. If we do this in Tech Certificate, it'll show all the tables for Tech Certificate. Vice versa. Wherever you are when you run the command, it'll show all the tables related with that context. And it gives you a lot of other information, like these are table type, if it has any self-referencing column names. Reference generation, user type, most of these are null. Does have at the very end, is insertable as yes, is typed no, and commit action. Most of these are null because they're not set. And most of those are things that we're not going to get into. Like the typed, one of the things you can do in Postgres, it's a very interesting thing, but it's not really relevant to our SQL, is you can turn a table into a class. Right? A table is a one kind of thing. A class is a programming structure. But you can take any table and turn it into a class. And then you can actually use the class as a column type, but then you're getting into all sorts of bizarre things. That one of the things that Postgres had tried to work on and did work on over the years is to become not only a relational database, but an object-oriented database. And there's a lot of object-oriented tools in there like that. So that's a schema for tables. If we wanted to see, like we wondered about updatable views, remember one of the things you can do is I'm going to do select table schema, table name is updatable. All right, from, and we'll do it from the, oh no comma there. Let's press enter. From information schema, views, and then I'm going to, all I'm going to do is remove one where not table schema equals PG catalog. So I just don't want to see the system tables, the system views. And not table schema equals information schema. So I'm just trying to eliminate the system ones for this. Now, how do you know what to do, what fields are there? One of the things you can do for these is you can, if you go into catalog objects, it gives you a list of all the views you've got here. And if you do just a select star, you'll get to see all the columns. Yeah. The output window is smaller. Which output? This one? I can't really make it smaller. I can move it down. You doing? Okay. You're all set up. Oh, okay. So if I run this, what did I do?
You have to after the
Oh,
I didn't see it on that.
it is updatable.
I guess you just need to remove the D.
It's just updatable.
It's correct if you just remove the E
Oh.
between T and A.
Oh, I see. Is that right? that does work. So I only created 2 views. You probably made more. It says one view is updatable and one is not. Thank you. So actually, do you leave the E out on updatable? Seems wrong, but that's okay. I just changed the spelling of updatable so that it's UPDATABLE. The point of these is, I'm not going to do a lot of them. The point of these is that you can find out anything you want to know about the database structure, contents. You know, like if I wanted to know, the one I have in the thing is a complicated one. I'll try it, which is to find out all the columns and constraints for a particular data, for a particular table. So if I do select column name, data, type, constraint name, constraint type, from, and I'll do it from information schema dot columns, and then we need to join that. So I'm going to join with information schema what is it? Oh, dot table underscore constraints. I'm going to try using here. This isn't the way I did it. Using are they the same? Information schema columns table name. No, I think I need to use an on. Because they're not matching on the same thing exactly. On information schema dot columns dot table name, and it equals information and type underscore schema dot constraints underscore table name, constraints dot. Is it dot? Yeah, dot table name. This is complicated. It would be hard to do off the top of your head. And then we want to do where information schema. This is actually where aliasing things would be good too. Information schema dot columns dot table name equals, and we're just going to do grant application. And then I had order by column name. Let's see if that works. What did I spell wrong? Information schema columns. That should exist. Did I spell something wrong?
Information.
Information. Thank you. Good eye. And I did it again. columns, columns.table name. Where did I write columns.table name? Okay. Information.schema. Missing. What did I do wrong there? Table name, information, schema. Columns, information, schema. Table constraints. Okay, constraint type. Where did I write constraint type? That's probably underscore. This is not my day for even watching my own typing there. Yay. Now, table names, like the column name, can appear many times. And the reason why it can appear many times is that there are different constraints in it. Right, so grant application amount has several different kinds of constraints on it. But it shows what kind. There's check constraints. There are primary key, foreign key, another check, primary key. Some of these constraints are imposed by the data types, and they're not ones you created. But that gives you like all of the columns plus all of the different constraints on them. I think that the check constraint on the integer is just that it is an integer data type, right? It's checking to make sure that it is a number, that it's within a certain range. And we could look into the constraint name a little more. And they can't be not null, right? So not null is a constraint. Doesn't matter too much. I just wanted to show you can get a lot of information back about the database. This is particularly useful if you don't know the database and if you're only approaching it from the command line, where you need to get this kind of information out because you can't just look over here. Does that make sense? It's not atypical that when you're working with a real database that's installed in a system that there's no command, there's no graphical interface. It's going to be command line, and you might need to figure out what are the columns of that table. You know, what are the different aspects of that database. And if you don't have it written out for you somewhere, you may have to do some quick queries to figure out what the columns are, what the data types are, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can the same method of finding out what table types they are be applied to Oracle?
Yes, but different. So they're going to name their system tables differently. All right. So, but the same principle applies, not the same exact. So in Oracle, in SQL Server, in Post or in MySQL, all of them have system databases. The function of the system database is to store this kind of information. Most of them have created a series of system views. In Microsoft, they all belong to the schema system dot. Actually, it's sysdot. And you can go in and you can look at the different views. It's standard of a relational database. The syntax here, the names of the different things is particular to Postgres. Does that make sense? But the principle is the same on any relational database.
And so if we learn database using PGSQL, how much of a learning curve that we have to go through if we're working with a system that dealing with Oracle or
Not a
Microsoft?
lot. So the big differences. All right. So all the stuff we did was select. You know, all the selecting tables, all of the subquery stuff, all the join stuff, all the view stuff is pretty much the same anywhere. All right. Things that are a little bit different, the function names are going to be a little different. You'll find functions that do the same thing, like you can find functions that extract the year, extract the thing, but they'll probably have a different name in Oracle and a different name in SQL Server. The ANSI just says you have to have functions that do certain things. It doesn't say how you have to name them. Data types, when you create tables, the create table syntax is identical across all of the platforms, but the data types may differ in their names, which is a real pain when you're trying to move one from one database platform to another, because the data types don't transfer. You have to rename a lot of the data types. There are actually utilities you can buy that say Postgres to Oracle or SQL Server to Oracle or Oracle to SQL Server that will do those transformations for you. And there's other kinds of software that will do transformations too. But those are the different. So the learning curve, to put a short answer on that, there is always a learning curve moving from one DBS to the other, but most of it should be really familiar. Most of it will look just the same. This is admin commands. The stuff I'm doing today are things that differ quite a bit across them because the structure of the database management systems are different. So the admin commands are often different. The other thing, the function, when we did the function stuff, that's a bit different across platforms too. Same principle, same logic, but slightly different syntax. So as I said, a learning curve, I would say it's about 80% identical across systems, so you have about 20% to learn. And the 20% is all in the more advanced stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So, just a quick question. So when you order by, I'm sorry, in the where and the order by,
Yeah.
literally just going through the entire application table and going through every column in that table.
It's bringing back every column and every constraint applied to those columns.
So you're just like an aerial view kind of the table.
Yeah, and it's more than, like, I could have just done the column names, and it would have just shown me the columns. I could have got the column and the data type without the constraints. The constraints are why I had to join. The constraints are what are applied to the table. So this gives you all of the table. No, you know, they appear several times, the columns, because they all have several constraints applied to them. Anytime you said something was not null, anytime you made something a key, it adds a constraint to that column. Okay. Are we, I'm curious. Huh. I was just curious about something. So we're going to do a couple of index things. Do you guys know what an index is? Anybody? So indexes are really important if you're running a database with multiple users that has a ton of data. They optimize how searches happen. They're called branching tree things. I'm not sure if I can't do one real justice, but so they basically go out and create things like this, And then each of these branches out into two. And basically it takes a value when you're searching for it, if it's got an index, and it splits it out to one of these boxes depending on the value, and then it splits it out to another box depending on the value. The thing is that if you had a 100 million rows, you might be able to get to your record with 5 hops, as opposed to going through all 5 million rows, right? The index allows it basically, if it's between these values go here, if it's between these values go here, it allows you to speed up searches enormously. There are some costs to indexes. So an index is an actual structure. It has to take the data and divide up the values, right, based on what you're indexing. It actually has to create the index. So that takes a little bit of what they call cost. The other thing that it can cost, indexes can speed up searches enormously, but they can really slow down insert updates and deletes. Anybody have a guess why? Because they have to rebuild the index, right? If you delete values, if you update values, if you change values, it has to recreate the index. So it can really slow things down for insert updates and deletes. So indexes are extremely useful on tables that are searched a lot. And you can do it on the values that are searched a lot. But they're a little bit dicier on tables that have an enormous amount of updated and inserted. And it's kind of an art. Basically you have to kind of test what works and what doesn't work in terms of optimization. So we'll build a couple of indexes real quickly. So I'm just going to do basic syntax. Create index, and then I'm just going to call it on person, and then I'm going to do person name, person last name, I guess. So we'll put an index on person last name. And that's actually all you have to do. That will create an index. So it ran successfully. If we go down, I'm going to close the ANSI things and go back up to Community Assist. And if you go down to the table, let's close the functions. So I did it on person. So under person here, I don't know if you can see it. There's an indexes, and now there's a person index, and it named it for me. You could, an alternate thing is I could, where I say create index. Let's see if I can get this down to where that is. I could have said create index and given it a name right here. Right, and then said on person table. Yeah.
Can you change the name of an existing index?
I think you can alter index and change the name. It's a good question. I'm not sure if I remember the syntax for that. Alter index person last name. IDX. Now, I'm sure I can do that part. I'm sure of. The other part I'm not sure of. Is there a rename? I'd have to look this up, but I'm sure you can. I'm going to spend 2 seconds, but not a lot more on that. Postgres, QL, alter index. Let's see. Let's just do rename index. Alter index, rename. Yeah, I was on the right track. Do you see it there, or can you? I'll do it, I guess. What do you want to rename it to? Maybe just person last name IDX, or IDX person last name, IDX last name. Let's just do IDX. IDX is short for index. It does not have to be there. So I'm going to do that. I didn't like that. Do I have to put it in quotes? No. So let me look at my thing again. Oh, two. I left out the word two. Okay, so now it's successful. If I refresh my indexes, it's now IDX last name.
Do you have to do alter index first and then rename? Like,
Yes,
as
yes.
written?
You, in order to change anything about the index, you always have to alter it. Alter index and then rename. You can't just rename.
One line to one line. Including index.
You need two. Rename two. Oh, and you have to run them together.
Sorry.
This word two,
Oh, we need two, got it.
and you have to run the two lines together.
The alter index and rename. Okay, got it.
It doesn't have to be two lines. I mean, it could all be like that.
So when you create the index on the person, I'm trying to understand what the person last name.
So person last name is the column.
Yes.
And so it's saying last name is going to create this index structure on the last name. So what happens is it might say this is A to Z. If it's A to B, go here. If it's C to D, go here. If it's E to F, go here. You know? So it'll split, it'll create that structure so that when it searches, it can hop its way down rather than go through all the records looking for the right value. So then when it gets to the box where the final, where it actually is in that box, then it'll go through the records in that box, which is usually each part of the index probably has 5 or 6 records. So it only has to go through, just hop 2 or 3 steps and then go through 4 or 5 records to find the answer. It's much, much faster than going through millions of rows. One other thing I'll say about an index. It is an utter waste of time to put them on tables as small as ours. It actually takes more energy to create the index than it does to go through all the rows. Right? So that's another thing to consider. Basically, they usually say the threshold is in like the 50,000 range. You know, where it actually starts to become profitable in terms of behavior to put an index in there. Yeah.
Yeah, so in a case where you're dealing with millions and millions of records, is it recommended to do index after hours or during the time when the system is not busy?
Well, so if you anticipate that something's, a lot of times they say to build them in from the beginning when you build the tables, if you know it's going to be that big and busy. But you can add them. They don't actually, creating the index doesn't actually slow anything down right away. I mean, making the index doesn't make any difference. It's only when you're using the indexes. Question?
Yes, in the alter index, the last line.
Yeah.
So is the underscore in the first part, the person underscore person last name underscore IDX, is that how
This-
to identify, is it that the new name?
This is what it gave the index.
Okay.
So when I did this, this is the name it gave it. And
Right.
how do I know that? I found it over here under indexes,
Uh-huh.
right here.
But then when you rename it, it flips.
Then it goes back, then now it's this name.
It flips, okay.
Now, a couple of things, if you didn't have this, there's a system, an information system, one query that would return all the indexes, right? And that would be useful to know what indexes are there if you need, because you really wouldn't know what the name is without being able to look it up. Although it is very consistent, right? This is much better than SQL Server's auto naming of indexes, right? In SQL Server, it would give the table name dot column name dot index and then a random GUID graphic. What is it? Generated user identifier, but generated isn't right. I'm not sure what it stands for, but anyway, it gives you a long string of letters. There's no way you're going to be able to guess that. This just gives you a fairly simple table name underscore column name comma ID access. And if it has to do another one, it'll put like a 1 on it or something. I mean, they do have to be unique. Not only to the table, they have to be unique throughout the database. Other questions on index? I'm going to show you a couple of little things. So I have this. Let's do, I don't know that it will actually use the query, but I'm going to do a select grant key, grant application, I guess it's a grant application key. Grant application date. I'm going to do person last name because that's the person getting the grant. And for right now, I'm just going to do grant application amount. I'm not going to worry about the types and all of that for right now. I'm going to do from grant application. I'm going to join, inner join actually, but join person. And I am we'll be using person key. There's always an index, by the way, on the primary key. So I'm going to do this. I want to see if it's going to use the index. So I went up here and I did explain analyze. And what it does down here is it shows me what it did, and it ignored my index actually, as I thought it might. Although let's do let's look at the data output. Whoa, that's the query. Why is that? Oh, it's because of the output there. Let's do a regular output for right now. I just want to choose a person. Let's choose a couple of Kims. It might be the same Kim. Could do Elliot. I just want to choose a person. Let's just do where last name, person last name equal Blake. I'm just curious if it'll use the all right, there we go. First I'll get the data. All right, then I want to see if it actually used, still didn't use the index, which is what I would expect actually. There's probably a way to force it to use the index. So what it did is it, when it does an inner join, it creates what they call a hash table. And so it created a hash inner join, and it's in person and grant application and does the join of those two tables. these are neat, actually, when you're analyzing queries. I'll do some with that this summer. When you're trying to figure out how a query is performing and if it's having problems. Because not only does it have this, but you can mouse over it and it gives you some stats about the rows and you know, the join type and some other information. And there's also a statistics thing up here that is giving us nothing. Should give us some stuff. Anyway, this stuff can be quite useful, but it's ignoring the index, and the reason it's ignoring the index is because we don't have enough records to make it worthwhile. And there's an optimization algorithm built into the data engine that basically says, look for an index when you need it, ignore it when you don't. And it doesn't need it. But I just wanted to show you how to do those. As I said, this summer we'll do a little of these with the optimization. It's kind of fun. Notice it ends up with just that again. Does it have anything else in there except one side? Huh, weird. Anyway, yeah.
When I did Word Person last night, it was like I accidentally put like a lowercase b and then that thing showed up and then I changed it to, you know.
So
and then it
this,
worked.
right, this seems to be case sensitive on the values, not on the, which I think is an option that can be set.
Okay. Like when you're creating the fields for it to be automatic.
I think it's actually a database option.
Oh, okay.
I think it's in the properties of a database. Don't want to go too much there, but let's definition, security, parameters, default privileges, SQL. Actually, it's not in any of those. Is it on the server? I'm sure that there's a place where the where you can set that. I need to figure out where. I know where to set it on SQL Server. I don't know where to set it here. All right, let's do one more. A couple of just variations of index. This is the normal, what they call balance tree. It's not exactly a binary tree. It's called a balance tree. Index, and it's what you get by default. But you can also create a unique index. So what am I going to make a unique one? On person, and then I'm going to do primary phone. This will fail. But unique index is basically, there isn't a unique index on emails. It means that no two emails can repeat. And if you put a unique index on primary phone, that would mean that no two can repeat. But what is the name? Did I spell something wrong? Person primary phone. It will fail anyway because there are phone numbers that are not unique because of the way I type them in. So because you can't, I would have to, if I wanted to actually apply this, I would have to go into the table and remove any duplicate phone numbers first. But that's how you do a unique constraint. Or unique, there actually is a unique constraint or a unique index. They do exactly the same things.
Hey, how are you?
And then I'm going to do, you can do a index that is on more than one table. So I'm going to do on grant application. And the reason you would do this is if these are things that are often searched for together. Not sure that that applies here, but you can just put, you know, 2 columns in there instead of 1. And so it's always looking for the pair when it's doing the feature. Again, that only makes sense if there are things that are always searched for together. As I said, I'm not sure that makes sense here. I'm just showing you how to set up the index. So you can have a unique index. You can have an index that's on multiple columns. You can have your normal kind of index. And then I'm going to show you just one other. This is I guess you would call it a filtered index. So I'm going to do on donation, and it'll be for donation amount. And I'm going to put a where clause on there. Where donation amount greater than 500. So this actually only applies to part of the donation table. It only applies to those records that are greater than 500. So that's a filtered index. For this purpose, for today, all I want to do is show you that indexes exist and how to make them. Applying indexes, figuring out where to put them, figuring out what to put indexes on is actually kind of a major activity for database administrators, right? When they're trying to optimize database performance, these become really important. But not just writing them, but testing them, testing them against loads, testing these indexes can become really important. I just want to show you that they exist. On our databases, they're too small. They're never even going to use them. Our database is never even going to use them. I've never managed. I've thought about getting you guys like somehow a 1 million record database, but there are problems with that. There's a couple of problems. One of them is it would make our virtual machine much larger. It's hard to find, too, records, that many records in a database. They don't share them. I mean, I could make fake records. I could do things like just log every IP interaction, all the service actions in Windows or something, and you could get millions of records that way, but they're not very fun to query because they don't mean anything to you.
They have lots of
What?
they have lots of large data sets. Like the city provides large data sets that you can just use for whatever.
Right, but they tend to give you the data, the interface.
Oh, really?
You're right, and they tend not to let you download the data. Also, when you download it, it tends to be CSV, so it can take an enormous amount of work to try to put the data together into a new database. I've tried it before. It's a little bit tricky. NOAA has climate data going back into the 1890s, and that would be fun to query, I think. But again, they give it to you as this huge CSV file and it would take me, I could do it, but it would take hours, maybe months to clean it. So because it's so old, there's lots of dead data in it. Because it's a CSV, they can't leave any blanks. So what happens is that wherever there's unknown climate data, they always just put 999.99. Basically, they put a value that's out of range. But you have to go through and clean all that out, or you're going to have some odd temp averages. Actually, though, if you guys could find, if you know of then there's the census data, but again, it's all pre-aggregated. They don't give you the raw data. So I don't know. It's hard to find really good data sets that are easily usable. Some of them could be, I guess, made to be usable. The other thing is that even science ones, a lot of times, they charge you money for the raw data. So they'll let you interface with the data, but they don't let you have the raw data for free. Anyway, those are indexes. Any questions on indexes? As I said, they're extremely important except when they're not, which is in our case. All right, this part is the weirdest part of all of this. I'm going to show backup and restore, and we'll see how this goes. So in the book, it tells you how to do it on Windows, and that works on Windows. It's a little bit different on Linux. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a terminal, and let's see if I can make this big. Preferences, text. I want to set the font. Initial terminal size, columns. Would it be here that the font would change? No, that's adding.
Is one of the options.
For the terminal?
Preferences.
So that's what it is. Set character encoding. I don't want that. Search view. Actually, we can zoom it. Control plus plus. That's not working. Why is that? Tell me when it's big enough. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
All right. So this is a little different than what's in the book, and it's different than what the Windows command would be. Let's see if I can remember it. So I am going to do sudo. Sudo is we're shelling to, what is that? Super user something or other. So I want to,
Are we doing this on Windows as well?
what?
This is not what we're taking on Windows, is it?
In Windows, no, you'd want to do what's in the book. Do you have the book thing there? I could look that up. I mean, if you want, let me show you the. What?
No.
I don't want to restart Firefox. Is it going to make me do that for anything? All right, I'll show you the Windows one in a bit. All right, let's go back to here. I believe it's sudo -u su. It's su -postgres. You don't have to do this. You don't have to switch to a Postgres user on, and this would be p@ssw0rd1. Well, so this is you're on Windows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a little different than this. So I think I will try to get you to the Windows one here in a moment and go over it as well. This is for Linux. So in Linux, we need to change. I'm changing the user to Postgres. You don't have to do that in Windows. In Windows, you just make a folder called backups, and then but you do have to navigate to the binaries Postgres to find a command, which is basically what we need is, let's see if I can remember this, pg dump. This is part you want in both. I'm going to do -f P, and I am going to say community assist PG. And this part would be similar, actually. PG, and then community assist. And then I will explain what I'm doing. SQL. So what we're doing here is we are backing it up to an SQL file. And I changed the user to Postgres. Postgres is the administrator in Postgres. pgdump is a utility that will allow you to back up the database. There's no way to do this in the command window, I mean in the SQL window. So I'm doing it in the command line here. I will show you another way to do this, which you can do graphically, which is probably easier. So I'm saying I want to output be a file. I want it to be plain text. There are different ways you can do it. You can output it as tar. You can output it as, there are lots of different ways to store it. You can kind of customize that if you want. This is the database, but I'm saying plain text. This is the database, and this is the output file. This is the symbol that says this is this output to this. So if I press this, all right, and if I do like an ls, you might notice that I now have a community assist PG SQL. This part, again, you don't have to do, but I'm going to do nano community assist SPG SQL. Nano is just a text editor, typical Unix text editor. So it shows you what the output looks like. I'm just going to exit that, which is Control X. So now this is the part that drove me nuts, because I was trying to figure out where I was. So I'm going to do that, and it tells me that I am in var lib Postgres SQL. In Windows, you can make a folder on your C drive called backups and just save the file there. In Linux, you can't do that because Postgres has no permissions to write it in your user folders. So you either have to go in and change the permissions and share the folder, which is a lot more work than I want to do right now. Or you have to just let it go where it's going to go, which is here. All right, so it's backed up. We have a backup of the file, right? This is actually how I created the backups that we installed from, that were up on GitHub. I am going to, over here, I'm going to right-click. I'm going to create a database, and I'm just going to call it Community Assist PG Copy. And the reason I'm doing this is that I prefer at this point to restore to a copy than to the original. So there's no tables or anything in this if I go down here. So if I go into the public schema, oh wow, why has it got everything in there? It copied everything. That's not what I wanted. Oh well, we'll restore to it anyway. I'm curious. I'm going to delete this. It's interesting that you can copy it that easy. I think what I'm going to do, right-click, create database. Community assist PG copy. Let's look at this definition. Security parameters, SQL. Why did it copy everything? And it probably did everything again. Yep. That's all right. We'll restore to it anyway, because if we screw it up, it won't matter. Strange, though, that it's copying everything. I need to investigate that. All right. So I want to restore. So PG dump is the utility, right, that we do this. So I'm going to do I actually have a whole bunch of I'm just looking at this, a whole bunch of variations of saving things, which you can look at. I'm not going to go through all of them. I am going to do restore dash dash DB name community assist. Oh, it should be an equal, not a underscore. So I'm going to do that copy. I'm going to do verbose, which tells me that things are more of what's going. And then I'm going to do community assist PG .SQL. So the file that we're going to use to do this. Did I leave something out here? All right, so I'm going to try this and see if it works. Oh. Oh, it's PG restore. Which makes sense. PG underscore restore. So what was the use PSQL? So PG restore is for if we made it tar. All right, so let's go to PSQL. And then I want to do -u Postgres -d community assist copy. -f -c, and then we want our community assist pg.sql. Does that work? Yes. So, not that you can tell, but it restored the the file back to this, which would make more sense. It would be a lot nicer if it had been empty, because then you could go and see that it was put all the tables back in. All right, so those are a couple of ways to do this. Again, the Windows way is a little bit different. Let me show you that real quickly, and then I will show you a graphical way to do it that is probably the easiest way of all. But I wanted to show you the command line way to do it. And there's lots of variations that are in the book, but I'm not going to do those right now. I think I'm going to copy it. Actually, let me save this. So I am going to save this as, because it's going to make me restart the. So will it have saved all of my content? No, I didn't think it would. All right. Okay, so I have everything back. So now I should be able to go to Canvas and show you the other. T222. Wrong one. All right, pages. Sorry, this is taking so long. Other book, chapter 11. So let's make this bigger. So, first of all, on C drive, I made a folder called PG Backups. So you could do that with just your file thing, just make a folder on C drive. I did it on C drive because that's the easiest path, right? It basically gets you, all you have to do is say C backups or whatever. It's just a lot easier than putting it somewhere more complex, but you don't have to put it there. But C drive, a folder on C drive is the easiest. Then I went to CD / which takes you to root, right, to the C drive. And then CD program files, Postgres, SQL, 10 bin. Now, if you got 11, it would be 11 bin, right, if you're in the server 11. So Postgres, SQL. So you find it in program files. You go to the number, 11 if that's what you got, and then bin for the binaries. So once you're there, then you can do the actual command, which is pgdump -u, which is where you're setting the user, Postgres, -f, we want it as a file, we want it as plain text, that's the same as it was in Linux, community assist PG, the same basic pipe for output, C:, and then I did PG backups, community assist SQL, and it will write the file to that folder. That's different on, and you don't have to worry about permissions and everything there, which you do on Linux. So pgdump is a utility that does the backup. Does that make sense? And that's for the Windows one. You guys need that for a minute? You can always go there and do it at some point. But I'm going to show you this here in a second. Do you guys want it for a moment more, or do you need? Go do the graphic one, which is actually how I tend to do it. Just because you have to leave the environment and go to the command line. In either Windows, actually probably on the Mac too, whatever, the backup, the PG dump is not in the PG admin. However, in PG admin, are you guys ready? You can do right click, backup. So we need to give it a file name, and I may still have permissions, but let's go to documents. That looks good. I'm going to say community assist PG SQL.
How did you get to that screen? Sorry, you went to
I right clicked on
Human Assist and then
so let's cancel. I right clicked, backup.
back. Oh, that's,
And then I click the three dots.
yes, that's the one. Thank you.
Okay. So community assist pg.sql. So I'm just going to select that. We don't want the format to be custom. We want it to be plain. The encoding doesn't matter too much. If I were to choose one, I would probably use UTF-8, which is Unicode. Role name, all of that's fine. We go to dump options. There are things that you want to do here. So we do want the pre-data. So you want to do whatever it takes to get the yes there. And we want the data, right? So we do want those. And you probably want the post data. All right, so what the pre-data is are the create table statements, right? Create tables, create view. So the pre-data is like create tables. Then there's the data itself. And then the post data are things like triggers and views and things like that. So you want those. So if you wanted only schema, it would only do the table definitions with no data, right? Or you could do only the data. These are the kinds of things you can do. But we're doing the create objects both before and after the tables, and we're adding the data. Now we really don't have to worry about any of these. We don't need to log the owner. The table space, we haven't dealt with table spaces at all, but table spaces are where physically on the disk do you want to store these. A table space is a logical description of a disk space. So we're just ignoring that. We'll go for the defaults. Down here, we want to use, and I don't know that this happens with the other, but we want to use insert commands.
There's still that where the screen looks different.
Why?
I think all of us.
So you have to go.
I'm not sure how you got to the other screen.
All right, so you've done all of that. So
Do we click back up on it?
now just so get out of there and just do click on dump options.
That's what I thought.
One option.
Yes, and yes, help that out.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So at the top, yes, the first three are yeses. This is yes by default, and I'll just leave it. And then I came down. I'm not worried. This is stuff that you were saying do not save, and we generally don't want to save this stuff. But we do want to use insert commands. The inserts command make it a little bit more, what would I say? a little bit more transferable. You know, down here, there's some options here, like you could tell it to drop the database and create the database. I didn't do that, which is why we have to create the database before we run the script. And I'm going to leave it that way. So I'm going to leave those as are. I'm not going to disable the triggers. And the rest is pretty much fine. So basically, all yeses at the top. And then I use insert commands. Those are the only ones I changed.
In the type of objects section, there you go. Steve.
So I did only this. Yes is set there by default.
Yeah.
So I'm going to do backup. What? Did yours all fail for the same reason? It should work. Yours worked, but yours worked on Windows. If they all failed on this, I think it's because it needs Python to run it. But there is Python on here. Python is on here, so I'm not sure why that would be an issue. I'm going to do one last try quickly. Back up. It says it's there, but it's 0 bytes. So I'm going to leave that stuff alone. Oh, except I want it not custom. Plain. All right, so in this version of Linux, you have to do it with the command line. It does work on Windows. It should work here. There is Python installed. For what it's worth, for those of you curious, this whole version of PG Admin is a Python app. So it was all written in Python. All right, so we won't worry about that. That normally works. It works on Windows just fine. Should work here. The command line does work.
So another thing, that this backup that we're doing here, is it different from the system backup? Or the system administration backup it has?
So there is a little bit difference. So this is a one-time, this is like a manual backup. Now you could create a, we're not going to, but there are ways to automate this, that it could happen. But it actually there's a whole nother backup and restore system that is has built-in timing regularity. It's more complicated, but there's a whole admin backup thing that you can add. It's not part of the database by default, but it's free and it's part of the Postgres environment that you can add. Does that make sense? So there is actually, and I might this summer, if you're around this summer for classes, I might show that because it is a little bit more robust. This just is, we're just backing it up for SQL, but typically in the real world, you would want to back up your database every couple hours, every few minutes, you know, and you would want to have that automated so that you don't have to deal with it. If you don't back up, like if your database crashes, you're only as good as your last backup. Yeah, so.
Backup frequently.
Yes. Okay. Last bit. This is taking longer. They often do. But what I want to do is create some users and assign some permissions. And they're not going to do quite as elaborate as in the book. So we are logging in as Postgres. In real life, that's a bad idea. All right, because we are logging in as the default administrator. And we gave it a password, but it's not really as robust as the password. It should be for something that every single instance of Postgres has. Every single instance of Postgres has a Postgres user that is the default admin. And the default password for Postgres is, anybody know? Postgres, yeah. So one of the things, if you were doing this for real production, the first thing you should do is, one, either downgrade the Postgres. Before you downgrade the Postgres user, before you make it so that they are not the admin, which is questionable. You might want to leave them admin, but just give them an impossible password, right? Just a massively password. But before you do that, you should make a new administrator, a new super user. And then you should also make users that have different permission levels. You should never log into a database, even as an administrator. You should never log into a database with administrative privileges unless you really need to. And the reason is you can do a lot of harm by accident. And you really want to come in with the level of permissions that gives you what you need, but doesn't allow you to do extra harm by accident. Does that make sense? So we've been logging in as an administrator. We could totally at any time totally screw the database. So it's not your best bet usually. I'm not going to replace the Postgres right now or change that, but you could do that. I'm going to show you. I'll show you real quickly a graphic on this, how to do it, and then we're going to do a couple. This is an SQL class. So way down here, and I don't know that I can make it too much higher, and I know it's real hard to see when it's low, but there's login and group roles. And we have a few, really everything we have is default here. There's a role to read all settings, there's a read all stats, somebody that can signal a backend, somebody that can, I don't know, scan the stats of tables, and then there's Postgres that owns everything. There's a monitor one too. These are built-in roles. So the roles here are kind of, they did, logins and roles are the same thing. The only difference is some roles have a login permission and some roles don't, but they're all roles. A login is a role, everything is a role. And a role is essentially a collection of permissions. So I'm going to create a real simple role that has login permissions. So I'm going to create an employee role. Well, actually, do I want one with login permissions first? Let's create one without. I'm going to so I'm going to say roles. So this is a one without login. I'm going to create, whoops, without the dashes. Create role, employee role. It's that easy to make a role. Of course, this role has nothing, right? When I go down here, if I refresh roles, there is now an employee role. But the employee role has no permissions, has no, I mean, it can't do anything, right? So it can't even connect to the database. It's not a login, you know, there's nothing. So I'm going to add some privileges to the employee role. I may not add as many as are in the book. We'll see. One of the things you have to do is you have to give them the right to connect to a database. So I'm going to say connect on database, community assist. Am I spelling that right? Community assist, it looks all right. PG. And I'm going to say to employee role. So they have the permission now to connect to the database. And then I'm going to, I did make an employee schema, right? So let's do, I'm going to grant usage on schema public, no dot, to employee role. That means they can use the public schema, except that has to be spelled right. And then I'm going to grant, I think this might be all I'm going to do on these, on tables in schema public to employee role. So what we've just done, although we haven't executed these yet, we've said that they can connect to the database, they can use the public schema, and they can select anything from any table in the schema. One of the nice things about creating schemas, which we did when we did views, right, is that you can assign permissions to the schema. Otherwise, you have to assign them to each person. And instead of saying select on tables in schema, you would have to go grant select on table person, grant select on table person address. You'd have to do it for every single table. By being able to do it to the whole schema, it just saves you a ton of having to assign permissions, right? And then because they're employees, let's do the same, basically the same 2 lines, but I'm going to do them for the schema, employee schema. Now, in the book, and I think in the assignment, I assigned a lot of other permissions. So typical permissions are basically based on the kind of commands we've done. Select means you can read them, right? Those are read permissions. Update means you can change the existing data. Insert means you can add new data. Delete means you can remove data, right? So the permissions tend to be based on those. Execute means you can execute a function, right? If you don't have execute permissions, you can't run any of your self-made functions or procedures. So, and the other thing is that any permission that is not explicitly granted is denied, right? You have 0 permissions. Anything that you are not explicitly granted, you don't have. That makes sense? This is generally true of databases. There is a thing where you can deny a permission, but typically you don't use it because basically if you never give them a permission, there's no reason to deny it. Actually, in here it's not deny, it's revoke. The only reason you need to revoke, if I want to delete employee role now, before I could delete employee role, I'd have to revoke each of these permissions before it would allow me to delete the role. Does that make sense? All right, so these are all, again, this is not realistic in that you would want to probably go through and figure out every permission that they would need, right? And make sure that they're granted all those permissions. The general rule with permissions is that you give everybody all the permissions they need to do their job and no more. Right, so nobody should have extra permissions. So I'm going to do those. Oh, so that should be in grant. Oh, on all. I forgot the word all. Yeah.
So
So if you were interacting with the database on a web page, like with PHP, would you typically have like a role that the code would interact?
So typically, if you're doing, and I talk a little bit about that in the chapter 2, I don't need to expand it a lot more. Typically, if you're coming in through a web page or something like that, unless it's like an intranet where you have all your everybody has their own login, typically you would create an application role. The web page would log in as an application role. And then when the user would log in, you're already logged into the database. So what it would do is it would go read the login table and see if your password and hash match. And then if it does, the application would decide what your permissions are beyond the application role.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in a company where it's a limited number of logins, everybody could have their own login. But in with an application like that, usually they actually call them application roles. And different applications could have different roles, I guess, if you did. All right, so we've created all of those. We've created an employee role. It has connect to the database. It has selects on schema public and schema employee. Again, that's not enough to do a job, but I think it's enough for our demo. So I'm going to create a new person. So I'm going to create another role, and I'm going to call it Jay Anderson. This is going to be for an employee. So you could do I think in the book I explained that all of the grant users and donors would log in through an application role, but we'd have the employees log in directly. Just so I could show logins mostly. So I'm going to do with password. And my passwords are always, okay. And then we're also going to say login and inherit. Okay, so I am going to create that. Now this gives Jay Anderson the ability to log in. So this is somebody with a login role. I'm not sure why login isn't. I'll get rid of the equal. Now login, inherit. Why does it not like that? With password, password.
Remove the comma after login.
Huh. Yep, weird. Which means my text is wrong in here. So. Okay, so we've created a role. Jay Anderson can log in. Jay Anderson has no permissions, though, other than logging in. Like 0. I mean, that's all they can do. They can't see the tables. They can't do anything. So the way that we're going to grant them some permissions is I'm going to assign them to the employee role. So I am going to say grant employee role to Jay Anderson. I think that's what I want to do. I always forget which way I want to do this. Is it Jay Anderson to employee role or employee role to Jay Anderson? Okay. So I am going to try to log in as Jay Anderson and see if I can do the select and see what the permissions are. So this is much simpler than the assignment or in the book, but it gives you the gist of it. So logging in here is a little bit weird. I need to go to the server. If you look at the properties of the server, the connection, it shows you who the username is. So what I have to do is I have to go to localhost and I want to disconnect the server. Okay, so I've disconnected the server. And then I need to go to the properties, connection, and I am going to change the username to Jay Anderson. All right, that's our new user. And I'm going to save, and then I am going to refresh or restart. Connect server, that's what I'm going to do. And it notice it is wanting, so it's passwords again. P at SSW0RD1. Should be in as Jay Anderson. I am going to, was it on the copy that I did it? Okay, I'm going to do query tool. I'll copy this back. Yeah, notice it says when I do a new query tool, it has Jay Anderson at localhost. All right, so I'm now logged in as Jay Anderson. And if I do select, I should be able to select any table. Select star from person. That should work. And it does. And I should be able to select from employee schema. What did I have under employee schema? Schemas, employee schema, views. Let's do employee view. And that should also work. And that does work. Let's try to insert into person. And so let's go back up to public person. I'm just trying to remember the fields. Last name, first name, email. Person, primary phone. And I need person in front of each of these. So person, primary phone. I'm going to leave the last two out. I think those are defaults, and it's going to fail anyway. And then the phone. Okay, so this should fail. And it should fail for a particular reason. Permission denied. Right, because we didn't give them any, we didn't give the employee group in the employee role permissions to insert. So there's no they're not able to do that. So just to go back, so this is the pain part, and I'm not going to do it more than this one time because it's just a pain. So I have to go in and I have to disconnect the server. And then I have to go into the properties, connection, and change it back to Postgres. And do save. This is actually easier at the command line because you can just switch users. And then I'm going to connect server. Okay, and then I can go back to my original one here. And I think I have to reconnect. So if I try to run something here, I'm just looking for something I can run. Yes, continue. Okay. I just was needed to run something to reconnect. Okay. So just as a recap, and then we're almost done. In fact, I think we are done. There's a ton of stuff that I did more on roles, but it's all basically the same thing with different examples. Created a role. Roles can have logins or not. This role doesn't have a login. The purpose of a role for a login would be, without a login, is basically to create a bundle of permissions that you can assign several people to. It's much easier to handle permissions as roles, as group roles. This is called a group role because it's much easier to handle them that way because you can handle the whole group at once, right? So all the people that have a similar set of permissions should be assigned to the same group role. Does that make sense? So then you assign the permissions, and that can actually be a pretty hefty task because you really have to go through and think about what all of the permissions they need to do are without giving them extra permissions. You know, so that could actually take some thought and some care figuring out that. All right, and this is a login role. And the one way you know that it's a login is that it has a password, it has login. And inherit just means that it inherits all the things that come with a login role. But all that really gives you at this point is the ability to connect. And then we assigned Jay Anderson to the employee role, which gives them the ability to do everything that's in the employee role. So that's sort of a pattern that you could use. And again, if you made an application role, then the application role would be a login, and it would come in through a web page, all of that. So those are roles and logins. Is there anything else? I think that's it. This stuff can be really important, again, when you're setting up a database for real use, where you have to start controlling how it's used, have to start protecting it. But I think that's about it for these. We have time. I might try that trigger. Questions. There's a lot here. We covered a lot, and I think it's probably a little confusing. Yeah.
Can you assign privileges when you're creating the role? In this instance, you just created the role first and then granted it access later.
I don't know that you can assign. I don't think so. I think you have to assign, create the role and then assign the privileges. Now, again, this is an SQL class, so I'm showing you the SQL way for that. Can you do, let's look at our roles. So we go down. So if we look at an employee role, so if I look at the properties, so it has a name definition. It has the privileges. So in this, you can kind of go through. It doesn't give you fine detail though. When you do it in the SQL, you can get pretty fine on the detail. This allows you, like, do you want to make them a super user? Can they create roles? Can they create databases? You know, this gives them some permissions, but it doesn't really tell them exactly. You know, it doesn't go for the fine things. You can add some parameters, security. I mean, a lot of these things, you can do some of it, but I don't know of any way to do. Let me look at, if you look at Postgres, Postgres is, it has all of these privileges, but they're high level. Let's look at Jay Anderson. Well, employee role didn't have them. Let's right click and we'll create a login or group role. So just do a test role. It's the same things though. Password, privileges, same privileges. I think actually to give any kind of definition to these roles, you really have to do it in SQL and do the grants. Now, the biggest shortcut is if you make schema, like because you can give it to the whole schema at once. So if you've created a schema that goes along with the role, you can do group assignments of things. Otherwise, you have to do it individual table by individual table, which is a real pain. Particularly so you'd have to grant select and then grant insert and grant update. I don't know of a way to assign all the permissions. I think you can. If you want them to be a super user, right? So if they're going to have all the permissions, I think you can do that at the moment you create the role. I'm not sure. I don't think I have that here. Super user isn't highlighted there. But I think there's a way to grant all permissions. And I might have to look that up. All right. I will post this. First, I'm going to real quickly, I'm going to switch databases, and I'm going to see what's wrong with my trigger. You guys might try to help me through it that have worked on it. I might have to look it up. I want tech review, tech certificates, query tool. So the trigger, the function was create or replace function. And it was basically a low grade flag, right? And it returns trigger. Now mine doesn't have the low grade flag, so let me alter table roster, add what did I call it? So let's do. All right, so I'm going to do this. Okay. So if, so I actually probably begin. Am I forgetting any? I need to do body as. How did I need to look at my triggers? Yeah, as body begin. All right. So I want to say if new final grade is less than 2.0, okay, then new dot low grade flag equals true. That should be spelled right. I don't know if I need a where with that or not. I made some of you guys do it, but I'm not sure. I'm going to do end if. And I think I want to just do end. I think this would be, I think I have to do then. I have to do the whole update here thing. Then update roster set. I'm curious if that will work without doing the where clause in there. And then body, right? So I'm trying to think this through because I know I had language P post PL PG SQL, right? Does that look kind of like what you guys have? I think I had you do a where on that. Let's see if it'll accept that. What does it not like about returns trigger as? That actually should be all right. Oh, I know why. Parens. Doesn't like the body at the end. That should be okay. What does it not like about that? Oh, return new. Still doesn't like body. End if semicolon. Still doesn't like body. Why doesn't it like body?
You think it's spelled differently?
Oh, their cap's different, which might be it. Yeah. Okay, so that's, let's see. I don't know this will work. This is just, so then I need to create the trigger. This is the trigger function, and then I need to create the trigger. So I'm going to create trigger. I'll call it flag low grades. And I'll make it different than because it has this. So it'll be after update. Okay, on roster for each row, execute procedure. And what did I name my procedure? Low grade function. Okay, is this any different than what you guys did? That got the recursive? Let me try to update. So first I'm going to do select star from roster. I just want to choose somebody to update. This one's already got a low grade, so 1097, but I will do update roster, set final grade equals, we're going to give them a slight increase, but it's still going to be under 2. Where roster key equals 1097. All right. Let's see what happens and see if I get the same recursion you guys are getting. No, I didn't like. So it doesn't say, it says new doesn't exist. So just low grade flag. If it's just low grade flag, then I do need to do where roster key equals new roster key new dot. See if it'll do that. I may have to drop it. Yeah, okay, so let's see what happens now. What did I call it? Add low grade flag. Oh, flag. Look at what I did. That's why the new didn't work too. Okay. Okay, so I got the same recursion. Why do I get that recursion? What is it that it doesn't like? Line 5 in the statement. doesn't like new. But if I don't do new there, but this is where we got our recursion. That's where we had it, right? That's the way it was. What is it not like about this? I don't understand. Those of you that are not interested can call it a day here. So now it doesn't like new lower flag. What? Why does it have that new? Did I not run that again? Oh. All right, this should actually just end up with the same recursion as before. So what is it that's doing it? Something it doesn't like about this.
The new one.
What?
The new one.
What do you mean?
The new keyboard. Maybe.
Possibly, but this would change everything. If I don't say new,
You don't need a parameter for a function.
what?
You don't need any parameter for a function.
No, trigger can't have parameters. But I don't understand if the new final grade is less than 2, then update roster.
So new is equal to this in our programming language.
Well, it's a little bit different in it's a little bit different in some of them. I'm looking for the trigger thing again here. Let's get rid of the new final grade here. So I was just looking, that's one of the things that's a little different. Column final grade does not exist. So it needs to be new. You know what? So we want to do update. Is greater than. I'm going to put this in parentheses. Shouldn't matter. I'm going to have to play with this, I think. It doesn't like the parentheses. I'm going to real quickly, and then I'm going to call it, I think. I will post everything. Oh, and I'm still video going too. Let me try one last thing, and then I think I'm going to just have to take it and play with it some more. I'm going to do, instead of after update, let's do before update. You did that, and it didn't work. So I have to drop this, right? Why did it not? That should have gone away. Why is it complaining about dropping the trigger? That's weird. So this is on roster. Trigger. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that. So if you have troubles with this trigger, don't worry about it. I will try to fix it at home and give you the code. I don't understand why it's recursive. Does anybody?
Oh,
typically it means that you're calling something that calls itself because it's repeating it over and over and over again, and that doesn't make sense. I don't see anything in here that's recursive. Final grade less than 2. And this would be on update because that's when you enter, they're all entered into the roster. And then at the end of the quarter, you update to add the grades. So it'd be on update. We're just looking for if the final grade is less than 2, then we want to flag it so that people could maybe look and say, okay, it's low. I don't see where the problem is here. All right, I will play. I've played with it already several times, and I'm kind of at a loss. So let me close the video and post the code, and we'll call it a day. And if you don't get it to work, I will give you the points anyway. If you do get it to work, let me know so I can look at it.